I worked 31 years for the county school district, started as a shop teacher at a high school in Dayton, Ohio, ended up as assistant superintendent before I retired at 63. I never made the kind of money people write books about, but I built a decent life, a house I own outright, a pension that covers my needs, and enough left over to help my kids when they needed it. None of that prepared me for what happened at my daughter's Thanksgiving dinner. I walked in and found my son-in-law's father sitting at the head of my table, in the chair my late wife picked out, with my name already crossed off the place card. I didn't make a scene. I said exactly 4 words. Then I drove home alone. That night, my daughter called me 23 times. I didn't pick up once. The dinner was at my daughter's house in Kettering. She and her husband bought it 3 years ago, a colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of neighborhood where people put out harvest wreaths in October and mean it. I'd helped them with the down payment, $40,000 from savings I'd set aside after my wife passed. My daughter had cried when I handed her the check. Said she didn't want to take it. I told her your mother would have wanted you to have the yard. I was supposed to arrive at 2. I got there at 2:15. I'd stopped at a gas station because my tire pressure light came on, and the pump took longer than it should have. I walked up the front steps carrying a pecan pie from the bakery my wife used to love and a bottle of good bourbon for the table. I could hear voices inside before I knocked. Loud, comfortable voices. People who'd been there a while. My son-in-law opened the door. He gave me a hug that was just a half-second too short and said, "Hey, glad you made it." The way you say it when you're relieved something's over. I followed him into the dining room. The table was set for 12. White cloth, the good dishes my daughter inherited from her grandmother, a centerpiece of dried orange slices and pine cones she'd probably seen on Pinterest. And at the head of the table, in the chair that had been mine every Thanksgiving for the past 9 years, sat my son-in-law's father. I'll call him what my grandkids call him, Pop Pop. He had a glass of wine already. He was mid-sentence in the story, gesturing with one hand, the other draped over the back of the chair like he'd always sat there. Nobody said anything when I walked in. My daughter was in the kitchen doorway. She saw me see it. Her face did something complicated. Not surprise, not guilt exactly. More like someone who has already rehearsed the explanation and is waiting for the cue. "Dad," she said carefully, "I saved you a spot right here." She pointed to a chair along the side, between her 7-year-old and her husband's aunt from Cincinnati. I looked at the chair, I looked at Pop Pop. He gave me a nod and a smile. The kind a man gives when he knows he's holding something that belongs to someone else and has decided that's not his problem. I set the pecan pie on the sideboard. I set the bourbon next to it. I looked at my daughter and said, "Enjoy your dinner." Then I walked out. No raised voice. No dramatic pause at the door. I just left. My son-in-law called my name from the porch. I kept walking. My daughter came out too. I could hear her heels on the brick path, but I got in my truck and I pulled out the driveway and I didn't look back. By the time I got to the end of the street, my phone was already ringing. I drove to a Cracker Barrel 12 minutes away, sat at the counter, and ordered turkey and dressing and a slice of chess pie. The waitress called me honey and refilled my coffee without being asked. It was the most comfortable I'd felt all day. My phone buzzed on the counter 23 times before 10 o'clock. Here is what my daughter didn't know when she seated me next to a 7-year-old. I had been watching this happen for 2 years. What occurred at that Thanksgiving table wasn't an accident. It was the last step in something that had been moving in one direction for a long time, and I had been standing still, hoping I was wrong. My son-in-law's family started coming to our holidays about 4 years after the wedding. That was fine. That's what families do. But over time, the dynamic shifted in ways I couldn't quite name at first. Pop Pop started arriving earlier. Started having opinions about where people sat, what time we ate, which games we played after dinner. Small things. The kind of thing you feel before you can explain. My daughter started checking with him before she finalized plans. Not just with me, with him. I noticed it first at Easter 2 years ago. She called me on a Wednesday to change the start time from noon to 2. I asked why. She said Pop Pop had a thing in the morning. I said it was Easter. She said, "I know, Dad, but it's just easier. Just easier." That phrase started appearing a lot. My son-in-law is a decent man. I want to say that clearly. He loves my daughter. He's good with the kids. But he has never once pushed back on his father, not in my presence, not once in 11 years of marriage. Pop has opinions the way some men have appetites, constantly, without much interest in what anyone else might prefer. And over time, my daughter had started managing around those opinions rather than through them. I had a conversation with her about it 14 months ago. Not confrontational. I just said, "I notice I'm getting less information about family plans lately. I want to make sure I'm still part of things." She said I was being sensitive. She said nobody was leaving me out. She said Pop just has a stronger personality and it's easier to schedule around him. There it was again. Easier. I didn't press it. I told myself I was reading too much into things. That's what fathers do when their daughters are happy. We convince ourselves the discomfort we feel is our own problem to manage. But then came July 4th. My grandkids' school does a parade in the morning, and we'd had a tradition since the oldest was 3 years old. I would pick them up, we'd watch the parade, get ice cream after, and I'd bring them home by noon. That July, my daughter called me the night before and said Pop wanted to take the kids to his club's cookout starting at 10. So they were going with him instead. She said, "We'll do the parade next year, Dad." I sat with that for a long time. I didn't say much. I said, "Okay, let me know if plans change." I hung up. I drove to the parade by myself and stood on the sidewalk and watched other people's grandchildren wave flags, and I thought, something has shifted, and I don't know how to name it yet. So I started paying attention differently, not suspiciously, not with anger, just with clarity. I noticed that when both families were at an event, Pop's preferences set the schedule. I noticed that when my daughter had to choose, she chose the path of least friction, and least friction had come to mean whatever Pop wanted. I noticed that I was being worked around rather than included, and I noticed that no one had ever asked my opinion about the seating arrangement at Thanksgiving. Not once, not ever, because it had always simply been mine, until it wasn't. I spent that Thanksgiving night in my own house, made a fire in the living room, put on a football game I didn't watch, had a small glass of the bourbon I'd brought back home with me, because I wasn't leaving that for someone else's table. My daughter left voicemails. The first few were confused. "Dad, what happened? Please call me." Then, frustrated, "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." Then, around 9 o'clock, something quieter. "I know you're upset. I just want to understand." I listened to all of them. I didn't call back that night. I called her the next morning at 9. She picked up on the first ring. She said, "Dad, I've been up since 6. I said, "I know, I'm calling now." She went straight into it. She said Pop had driven 4 hours to be there, that he was older, and it just made sense to give him the head of the table, that she didn't think I'd care so much about a chair. She said I'd overreacted. She said leaving like that, in front of everyone, had humiliated her. I let her finish. Then I said, "That chair was your mother's choice. She picked it out. She sat me there the first Thanksgiving after we moved into our house 34 years ago. I have sat in that chair at every family Thanksgiving since she died. You knew that." Silence. "I didn't leave because of a chair," I said. "I left because you made a decision without asking me and my direction and assumed I would simply absorb it." She said, "I didn't think." "I know," I said. "That's the part I need you to hear." I told her I wasn't angry. I meant that. The anger had burned off somewhere on the drive to Cracker Barrel. What remained was something more like sadness with a hard edge. Grief, maybe, for something I hadn't found the right word for yet. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Pop didn't mean anything by it, that he didn't even know about the chair. I said, "That's possible, but you did." She didn't answer that. I told her I needed a few days. She said okay. We hung up. Her husband called me that afternoon. He was careful, measured. He said he wanted me to know that he valued our relationship, that he hoped we could move forward. I appreciated the call. I told him so. I also told him gently that forward movement required both people going in the same direction. He said he understood. I'm not sure he did. What happened next is the part nobody tells you about in these situations. There are no press conferences when you're a 68-year-old retired school administrator. There are no lawyers with sharp eyes and Italian suits. What there is your daughter posting a vague thing on Facebook about choosing peace over conflict this holiday season, with a picture of a candle, and a comment from her mother-in-law saying, "You handled it beautifully, sweetheart," and 11 people liking it. I'm not on Facebook much. My neighbor's daughter showed it to me. She thought I should know. I sat with that too. My son-in-law's mother had always been polite to me in that careful way that means she has opinions she's keeping to herself. She lived in Columbus, came to things occasionally, never made waves, but she had always been closer to my daughter than I'd noticed, apparently. I called my son, who lives in Colorado. He's my younger one, never married, works in logistics. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is his way. When I finished, he said, "Dad, you've been getting smaller at that table for 2 years. I'm glad you finally got up." I hadn't thought of it that way, getting smaller, but he was right. I'd been accommodating myself into a corner, one small concession at a time, and I'd mistaken tolerance for grace. I didn't reach out to my daughter for 4 days. I spent those days doing what I do when I need to think. I worked on a set of bookshelves I'd been building in my garage. White oak, mortise, and tenon joints, no shortcuts. Repetitive, careful work. It helped. On the 4th day she called and asked if she could come over. She arrived alone, no husband, no kids. She sat at my kitchen table, the old one, the one her mother and I bought at an estate sale in 1987, and she looked tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. She said, "I've been thinking about what you said." I poured her coffee and sat down across from her. She said, "I think I've been trying to make everyone comfortable for so long that I stopped noticing when I was making you uncomfortable. That took something out of me that I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, more like recognition." I said, "I know that's not easy to say." She said it wasn't. She told me that over the past few years, she'd been navigating between 2 families with strong personalities, her words, and that she'd been taking the path of least resistance without thinking carefully enough about what that path was costing. She said she'd told herself I was easy, that I wouldn't mind, that I was the safe person to disappoint. That one landed hard, the safe person to disappoint. I told her I understood why she'd done it. I said I probably made it too easy to be accommodating by never pushing back, same as I'd done with her mother 30 years ago on things I should have spoken up about sooner. I said some of this was on me. She looked surprised. She said, "You don't have to say that." I said, "I know. I'm saying it because it's true." We sat for a while without talking. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. The refrigerator hummed. "Normal sounds," she said. "How do I fix this?" I said. "There's no fix exactly. But next Thanksgiving, I'd like to be asked. That's all. Not just told where I'm sitting." She said, "That's fair." I said, "In that chair." She nodded slowly. She understood. We talked for another hour. About her husband, about the kids, about her mother-in-law's Facebook post. She said she'd already had a conversation with her husband about it, said some things had needed to be said between them for a while. I didn't ask for details. That was between them. Before she left, she hugged me in the doorway the way she used to when she was small, arms all the way around, chin on my shoulder. I'm 6'1". She's 5'4". She used to have to stand on my feet to reach. I held on longer than I normally would. Because I'm 68 years old, and I've learned at some cost that the moments worth holding are the ones right in front of you. That was 8 months ago. Things are different now, not transformed, not cinematic, just different in the way that real things change. Slowly, with setbacks, with the occasional awkward dinner where everyone is being slightly too careful. Pop still comes to holidays. He sits where he's told now, which I think surprised him. My son-in-law has started calling me once a week, just to check in. I don't know if my daughter asked him to. It doesn't matter. I went back this past Easter. My daughter put me at the head of the table without saying anything about it. Just set the place, put my name on the little card she makes for the kids, and moved on. I noticed. I didn't say anything either. After dinner, my 7-year-old granddaughter climbed up into my lap and fell asleep during the movie. I sat there for 40 minutes without moving because I didn't want to wake her. I have not always done the right thing in my life. I stayed quiet too long about too many things. I let convenience become a habit and called it patience. I let other people define the shape of the room and told myself it didn't matter. It matters. If you've ever sat at a table where you should have been centered and found yourself moved to the edge, I want you to know something. Leaving quietly is not the same as giving up. Sometimes it's the only honest thing left to do. And the conversation that happens after, the one at the kitchen table, over bad coffee, without an audience, that's where things actually change. That's where I found my daughter again. I'd like to know if you've ever had a moment like that. A holiday, a family event, a room where you realized something had shifted without anyone asking your permission. Tell me where you're watching from and what you did. We share stories like this every week about the quiet moments that end up meaning the most. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.